Okay, lecture 2, we'll do a brief review of, biological chemistry in this lecture. So hopefully these are the topics you're already familiar with. It'll be a brief lecture. So we're doing this because these concepts are, again, very important when you study molecular biology. Okay, so I think you probably did this when you took general biology class, but we're doing it again because understanding of these concepts are very important. Okay, first of all, chemical bonds and energy transfer. Okay, so chemical bonds are attractive forces that hold atoms together. So atoms are the unbreakable entities that are making molecules. You know that, right? So when those atoms come together, they are held by chemical bonds. Okay, so we'll talk about bonds and how they are made, how energies are involved in forming those bond formation or breakage of the bonds and things like that. So they are important because they make up biological molecules, like I said, and they interact. And when they interact, they make larger molecules. Strong covalent bonds and weak non-covalent bonds are just like ionic bonds, hydrogen bonds, van der Waals bonds, are all vital for life because formation and breakage of the bonds are done constantly in the living cells. Okay, and weak bonds mediate the interaction between enzyme and substrate. So when an enzyme is binding with substrate, it catalyzes the breakdown of substrate into the products, right? So how do enzymes recognize bind its substrate? Of course, there's a structural fitness, and when they recognize and bind, all these interactions happen. Okay, and not only between the enzyme and proteins, and also between proteins and DNA, or between proteins and RNA, or between the two different DNA molecules and DNA and RNA. These bonds are always formed and broken. Okay. So they are very important among the molecular interaction. That's what it's saying. Weak bonds also determine the shape of molecules and their functions. Okay, so we'll talk about DNA structure. Okay, DNA is made up with two strands of nucleic acid. Okay, how do they stay together as a two strand? Hydrogen bonds, right? And then how the proteins maintain their shape and structure, again, through these bonds, covalent and non-covalent bonds, peptide bonds, of course, and then hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, and all those things play an important role. The strength of bonds correlates with their length. What does that mean? The bonds are stronger when they form in a very short distance. So two atoms connected by a strong bonds are closer together, like I said, okay, than the same two atoms that are connected by weak bonds. Okay, there's more free energy. Then the molecules will get spaced out. That's what it means. The stronger the bond is, the molecules will be brought together strongly. The number of covalent bonds that an atom can form is its valence. Okay, so valence is the number of electrons it has in its valence shell. So through those valent, it can develop covalent bonds by sharing its electrons. So, for example, oxygen has a valence of 2. So oxygen can form 2 covalent bonds. So, to fill those 2 valent electrons from its neighbor, it'll try to maybe take electron from its neighbor who are willing to share the electron bonds. So you can form 2 covalent bonds, just like H2O. 2 hydrogens come together, sharing their electrons and forming 2 valence covalent bond with oxygen. Okay. So chemical bond formation or breaking involves change in the form of energy. So normally bond formation requires energy, and breakage of chemical bond, normally release energy. That's how you want to understand and memorize. The chemistry of life. Living things are made up of matters, and matters are made up of elements, of course, right? And elements are the substances that cannot be broken down through chemical reaction anymore. Okay, so there are 4 major organic elements in living system that are commonly found. Carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen are 4 main organic elements. For example, like DNA, proteins, they are made of a bunch of these guys, these elements. Okay, so in nature there are about 92 elements that are found and identified so far, but it may increase, depends on who's identifying more. So far 92. And then compounds are made up of 2 or more of elements when they're combined together through chemical bonds. Examples are sodium chloride, table salt, made out of sodium and chlorine, 2 elements together. And water, H2O, is again made up of 2 elements of hydrogen and 1 element of oxygen. Okay, so those are compounds. Each element consists of a certain type of atom that is unique. Okay, element made up of atom. An atom is the smallest unit of matter that still has the property of an element. Okay, and that property is determined by the number or amount of protons, neutrons, and electrons that each atom has. Makes sense? So atomic number is defined as unique number of protons that are found from each atom. Okay, and the thing is, normally number of protons is same as the number of electrons each atom has. And the mass of an atom is determined by the number of protons added with the number of neutrons. That's the mass of an atom. Okay, protons is defined as substance, as a subatomic particle found in the nucleus of an atom. It's normally positive electric charge. So if you look at this, these are the protons found from the nucleus, right? And then these brown ones are the neutrons. Electrons are these green ones, right? Okay, the neutrons again, subatomic particle with no net electric charge. Again, these guys. And the electrons are subatomic particles, carries a negative electric charge. So the green ones with negative charge. Each element has a unique number of protons and mass. Of course, protons plus neutron is a mass. The number of protons equals the number of electrons in each atom. That's what I said. So if there are 4 protons, there should be 4 electrons outside. Okay? There may be 5. It's not showing up there, but because there are 5 electrons, or maybe 6. Okay? And isotopes are the atoms with different number of neutrons, but they have the same they behave the same chemically because they have the same number of protons and electrons. So example is this: carbon 12, 13, and 14. Okay, these are the isotopes. If you look at them, they have the same number of protons throughout, right? And they have the same number of electrons, but difference comes from the number of neutrons. Carbon 12 has 12 mass, because 6 plus 6. 13 has 13 mass, or 6 plus 7. 14 has 14, 6 plus 8. Okay, these are isotopes. But they behave chemically the same way, because it's normally the number of protons and electrons that determines their reactivity. Okay? Electrons possess various amount of potential energy, because it depends on where they are and how many valence they have. The further an electron is located from the nucleus has more potential energy, because they can move around more and they can interact more. They have tendency. And electrons floating in their shells, we call them electronic shells. And valence electrons are important because electrons located in the outermost shells, and they determine the chemical behavior of atoms, right? So in this case, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 valence electrons there, and there are 4 positions that can be filled. Okay, so those are valence electrons. It's actually electron shells, kind of 3-dimensional kind of a cloud where electrons are moving around. Okay, covalent bonds is formed by sharing of electrons between 2 atoms. Okay, this is the strongest bond it's hard to break because it takes a lot of energy to form, and it takes a lot of energy to break as well. So it's going to release a lot of energy too. So very large amount of free energy is required when you form this covalent bond. Very strong bond, not easily broken normally. Examples are phosphodiester bond in DNA. Nucleotides come together, they make DNA deoxynucleic acid by developing so many of these phosphodiester bond. And peptides come together, make proteins by forming peptide bonds. So we call protein as polypeptides, right? So those are covalent bonds. So water is another example. Okay, when they come together, so two hydrogens sharing their electrons, okay, with the oxygen that needs 2 extra electrons. So each hydrogen is sharing its electron with oxygen. So by doing so, hydrogen is filling its valence shell with 2 electrons here, 2 electrons there. Same thing happens with oxygen by sharing 2 electrons with hydrogen. So oxygen is also filling its valence shell. Okay, H2 hydrogen gas, same way. 2 hydrogen atoms come together, sharing electrons, so forming the covalent bond. So this is a covalent bond, that's a covalent bond. Okay, so strongest chemical bond is a covalent bond, formed by sharing of electrons. Makes sense? And then non-covalent bonds, there are many kinds of non-covalent bonds. Compared to covalent bonds, these are weaker chemical bonds, but they are very important in biological system because they form and break, and by doing so, a lot of biological processes are mediated. Examples are hydrogen bonds, ionic bonds, van der Waals bonds, and hydrophobic interactions. Okay, so these are all weak bonds, have less energy. So covalent bond, how much of energy is involved? 50 to 100 kilocalorie, very strong. But here, these bonds are very weak because they're only like 1 to 7 kilocalorie per mole energy is involved when these bonds are formed. And weak bonds are constantly made and broken at physiological temperature and conditions, which allows interaction among biological molecules. So constant forming and breakage of these interactions happen readily. That's what it means. Number 1 example is ionic bond. Ionic bond is made between opposite charged ion and negatively charged ions. So if you look at maybe this, sodium and fluorine, okay? So Na is positively charged and fluorine is negatively charged, okay? Because of that, sodium can easily donate this one extra electron, okay? And when it does that, so sodium becomes Na+, okay? And fluorine, you can receive that one extra electron from sodium and get one more electron inserted into valence shell, okay, right here, okay? Then it becomes F- when it receives extra electron, okay? So then that's more stable form. And for sodium, losing this electron is more stable form. So Na+ form is more stable form. Fluorine, it's minus form, receiving one extra electron is more stable form. So F+ is a stable form. So by donating and receiving electrons, they can stay together by forming ionic bonds. That's what ionic bond is. Okay, so donating and receiving electrons. Okay, so ionic bonds are formed among different biological molecules. This example is a protein. Okay, so between 2 maybe amino acids, one positively charged, maybe the other one negatively charged, positively charged, negatively charged amino acid. They can maybe donate electron from here and receive electron here, and by doing so they make this ionic bond. Okay.